All right, hello again, everybody. Today marks the final lecture of the course, and it has been a tremendous pleasure. And I hope you all have benefited greatly from this class. Okay, so today we're going to be bridging the gap between the ethics section of the course and the epistemology section of the course. So, according to moral encroachment, epistemic norms are in some way subordinate to or sensitive to moral norms, such that when we have beliefs that run the risk of harming another person, right, or beliefs that wrong another person, merely in virtue of holding that belief, it follows that our epistemic norms need to be sensitive to those beliefs. And that's what moral encroachment says. So let's just start with a case. So this is from the Basu piece, and this is really a touchstone case in this literature. I'm just going to read it. Agnes and Esther are members of a swanky DC social club with a strict dress code of tuxedos for both male guests and staff members, and dresses for female guests and staff members. While preparing for their evening walk, two women head towards the coat check to collect their coats. As they approach the coat check, they both look around for a staff member. As Agnes looks around, she notices a well-dressed black man standing off to the side and tells Esther, "There's a staff member. We can give our coat check to him." The man they approach is famous historian John Hope Franklin. Okay, so let's imagine that the staff members, nearly all of the staff members at this club are black. And let's imagine that nearly all of the um, the members of the club are white, right? And so when someone sees a black person in a tuxedo, right, they are very reasonable to assume that that is a staff member, given that there are so few white staff members and there are so few black club members, right? But the belief in question, right, that this person is a staff member seems to be racist. So let's think about this. Okay, so like I've tried to say, is that Agnes and Esther's belief appears to be justified. You know, if we imagine percentages, right, if 95% or 99% of the club members are white and 99% of the staff members are black, you know, chances are when you see a black person, it's going to be a staff member, right? Okay, but it seems like um, there's like a moral problem with the belief, right? To conclude merely on the basis of somebody's race that they are a worker or that they are a staff member seems to be in some way racist, right? So here's the question. We have epistemic rationality, right? Well, if there's a 99% chance of something being true, it's reasonable to believe that it is true, right? And then we also have a moral norm, right? Namely, don't form beliefs about people merely on the basis of race. And so these two important philosophical things are in tension with one another. So it seems like in order to be epistemically rational, maybe sometimes we have to be racist. This is Tamar Gindler in a 2011 paper. She makes this conclusion. She says that epistemic rationality just sometimes requires us to be racist, and it's a sad conclusion. So we have this case on the table, right, for a proposed racist belief that ends up being false, right? So the question is not whether or not the belief gets to count as knowledge, because in order to be knowledge, it has to be true. The question is whether or not the belief in question is justified. And so given epistemic justification and given that it's reasonable to hold justified beliefs most of the time, it seems like we have a justified belief that's also racist. Okay. Okay. Cue moral encroachment. Um, Moral encroachment is the view that epistemic norms are in some way sensitive um, to moral factors, right? Moral factors can affect the epistemic status of some beliefs, right? Okay, so here are three plausible criterion for when a belief might have the morally relevant features. So, if a belief poses the risk of harm to another, right, then we might think that moral encroachment obtains. When beliefs wrong other people, right, then we might think that moral encroachment obtains. Or when beliefs are caused by morally problematic belief formation processes, we might think that moral encroachment obtains in those cases, right? And so people will pick one or two or all of these as the criteria for when moral encroachment obtains. So, um, so um, my view, right, the paper that I wrote, and Basu's view is a radical moral encroachment view. This is the view that that moral encroachment obtains only if the belief in question will wrong another person, right? And so there's a question here. How can beliefs wrong other people, right? Well, if we hold that view, right, if we hold the view that beliefs can wrong other people, that's called doxastic wronging. Doxastic wronging is the view that we can wrong another person in virtue of what we believe about them. That is, the content of our belief can wrong another person, whether or not they know about it at all. That's kind of the kicker here, right? So there's a case where a racist hermit is reading a newspaper, and there's an Indian person named Sanjeev on the cover of the newspaper, right? And the racist hermit immediately says, "That guy probably smells like curry," right? That's probably like a racist thing to think. And it turns out that the belief is true. At that point in time, Sanjeev has just finished making curry, right? And so what we have is Basu in a different paper. Basu argues that this belief, even though it is true, right, is an example of a doxastic wronging, right? So, and the thing is that the hermit is never going to meet Sanjeev ever, ever, ever. There's like no risk at all of Sanjeev finding out what this person believes about him. And so rather it's just merely holding the contents of some beliefs, that those things can constitute wrongings, right? Okay, and so the idea with radical moral encroachment is that when beliefs have that feature, right, when beliefs have the potential to wrong other people, that's when the moral norms can affect the epistemic norms. Okay, so another question we might ask is, how does moral encroachment work? So there are three possibilities, right? First of all, beliefs that wrong or beliefs that are somehow morally problematic, right? Maybe they're formed in morally problematic ways, right? By morally problematic processes, or they run a risk of harming somebody, right? Beliefs that wrong require more evidence to be justified or to count as knowledge or to count as rational or whatever. Okay, so the idea here um, is this comes from like an evidentialist framework. And we didn't talk about evidentialism, but evidentialism basically says that you have knowledge if and only if you have evidence, a sufficient amount of evidence that that proposition is true, right? Or that your belief is true, right? So you kind of acquire all the evidence and you acquire all the counter evidence, and then you form your belief in virtue or with regard to that evidence. Okay. So the idea here is that when there's moral stakes involved in a given belief, well, then we just raise the evidential threshold, right? If you need this much evidence most of the time to have knowledge or to be justified, for this belief, it like moves up some, so that you need to be like absolutely certain about some beliefs in order for them to obtain the relevant epistemic status, which is justification or knowledge, say. Okay, so we can either raise the level of evidence that we need, or what we can do is we expand the sphere of relevance, expand or contract the sphere of relevance depending on the moral features of the belief. So we didn't talk about relevance either, but Matthew McGrath, in the piece that we read a couple of days ago, um, he writes about the relevant alternatives condition on knowledge, right? So go back and reread that section because it's important. But the idea here is that we have a kind of sphere of relevant alternatives, and the condition is that when we rule out all of those alternatives, well, then we can get knowledge, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the third possibility is that moral encroachment can have both of these mechanisms working at the same time. This is my view that I argued for in my paper, and it's a novel view, which is cool. But the idea is that, look, a belief that has the morally relevant stakes can raise the evidential threshold and also bring more or bring more relevant alternatives to bear, or bring fewer relevant alternatives to bear too. Okay, so let's talk more about relevance. Um, so, so relevance is um, can be understood as either a necessary and sufficient condition on knowledge, or as just a necessary condition on knowledge. So we can modify it. So we could maybe stick this on to, say, the competence manifestation or the safe competent manifestation accounts of knowledge, right? And we could just tack on another condition. So the idea here is that S's belief that B counts as knowledge if and only if, or only if, S has ruled out all relevant alternatives to B. Okay, so like, so what's a relevant alternative, or what is an alternative? An alternative is a possibility that would undermine your belief, right? So a touchstone example of this is, suppose that you and I are standing at a zoo, right? And and uh, and you say something like, "Hey, look at that thing over there. That's a zebra," right? Okay. And suppose that I'm just being kind of mean, and I'm like, "Look, you don't know that that's a zebra. It could be a very cleverly disguised mule." Okay. Um, and so now I have introduced an alternative to your belief that the thing that you're looking at is a zebra, namely that it could be something else, right? It could be a cleverly disguised mule. So the idea here is that until you rule out the possibility that the thing that you're looking at is a cleverly disguised mule, until you rule that possibility out, you don't know that what you're looking at is a zebra. Okay. Um, a less exaggerated case, let's imagine that you have two teachers and you have a kid that comes out in spots, right? And and you have these two teachers that say something like, "Oh my gosh, I bet he has mumps," and then the other teacher says something like, "No, he could just have like a heat rash," right? And so that would undermine my belief that the kid has mumps, right? In order to believe that the kid has mumps, I need to rule out the possibility that he has a mere heat rash, right? And so the idea here is that there are all of these alternatives, right, that are mutually exclusive to the belief in question. And what we have to do is we have to eliminate these alternatives in order to get the knowledge that we want, right? In order for our belief to count as knowledge. Okay, so we can distinguish between relevant alternatives and irrelevant alternatives, right? So let's suppose that you and I are bird watching, right? Um, and I see a bird flying, and I say something like, "Look, that's a blue jay," right? And let's suppose that you say something like, "No, you don't know if that thing could be like a robot, right? Like it could be like a bird, like a super bird-like robot that somebody crafted like in a laboratory somewhere and is like it has like a remote control and it has a camera and it looks around." Okay, we might say that that's pretty ludicrous. That seems to be very, very, very unlikely, right? So we might think that the possibility that you're entertaining, right, the alternative to my belief that what I'm looking at is a blue jay is such an irrelevant alternative that we need not eliminate it, right? So only relevant alternatives um, need to be eliminated in order to get knowledge, not necessarily irrelevant alternatives. Okay, so this is 101 relevance. So what does this have to do with moral encroachment? Well, um, moral encroachment might make some possibilities relevant, and it might make other possibilities irrelevant, right? So consider um, you and I are standing in the club, the DC nightclub, right? The super swanky one. And we see a person, a black person, and we both we say we come to form the belief that who we're looking at is a staff member, right? Um, and suppose we were to think that it was irrelevant that what we're looking at is not a staff member, is a club member, right? Who we're looking at. Okay, so moral encroachment is going to say, no, it's going to assert that the possibility that the person we're looking at is not a staff member and just makes that possibility relevant, right? So that we have to rule out that possibility in order to know, right? So, um, moral encroachment can sort of move other possibilities into the sphere of relevance. That's the idea here. So that if we're forming beliefs about who is and who is not a staff member, right, we have to rule out the possibility that they're not a staff member, even though it's really, really unlikely, right? So, anyway, this is one mechanism of moral encroachment, and this stands opposed to the evidential threshold raising mechanism, and moral encroachment can potentially make epistemology less racist. So anyway, if you choose to write your paper on this topic, and I hope you do, you can reach out to me, you can chat with me, and I will reach back out, talk to you. Anyway, thank you all for a great semester.